What if everything you thought you knew about World War II was missing a crucial, heartbreaking piece? Prepare yourself for a story of unbelievable resilience and unthinkable suffering. These were not just statistics. These were women, captured and forced to endure horrors that history tried to forget. Their silent screams echo through time, demanding to be heard. This is the hidden story of Japanese women prisoners of war, and it's a story you deserve to know. They serve as a cautionary tale about the costs of invisibility and silence, and as an inspiring example of resilience and agency in the face of systemic oppression. By remembering and sharing these narratives, society ensures that the lessons of the past endure, honoring not only the struggles and suffering of these women, but also their extraordinary courage and ingenuity, ensuring that their sacrifices and achievements are never forgotten. Moreover, these accounts challenge contemporary readers to consider the broader implications of war, how gender, social roles, and vulnerability shape the experience of conflict, and how recognition of these factors is essential to creating just and humane societies. Today, as scholars, educators, and writers continue to uncover and analyze these stories, their relevance resonates beyond history classrooms. The experiences of Japanese women prisoners of war inform ongoing discussions about human rights, gender equality, and the protection of non-combatants in contemporary conflicts. Collectively, these acts serve as a testament to the human capacity for endurance, creativity, and moral courage, even under the most oppressive circumstances. The hidden story of Japanese women prisoners of war is ultimately one of endurance, courage, and sustained humanity under unimaginable pressure. These narratives remind us that the consequences of war reach far beyond the battlefield, touching those who are often invisible in conventional histories. By carefully reconstructing these experiences, historians and storytellers provide a more complete understanding of the past, honoring the strength, resilience, and dignity of those who endured captivity. These stories are both deeply personal and broadly instructive. Each narrative demonstrates that survival in captivity was never a solitary achievement, but often depended on community, creativity, and the ability to navigate complex social and institutional hierarchies. The act of writing letters, creating small clandestine gardens, sharing meager rations, or teaching younger prisoners were not merely pragmatic choices. They were assertions of agency, dignity, and identity in a world designed to strip women of both. Every act of solidarity, every whispered story, every small ritual of care became a lifeline, linking women to one another and to the memory of a world beyond barbed wire. By understanding the full scope of their experiences, contemporary scholars and policymakers gain insight into the ways conflict impacts civilians differently, particularly those who are gendered and socially vulnerable, and how these impacts reverberate across generations. The legacies of these women also extend internationally. Their experiences informed early humanitarian discourse, highlighting the importance of protecting women and non-combatants in conflict zones, influencing the development of policies aimed at safeguarding human rights during wartime. As a result, the study of Japanese women prisoners of war is not only an exercise in historical documentation, but also a reflection on the broader implications of war, gender, and the resilience of human beings under systemic oppression. By preserving these accounts, historians ensure that the suffering, resilience, and agency of these women are recognized, giving voice to those whose experiences had been marginalized or overlooked in earlier historical narratives. Modern scholarship has gone further, exploring how these experiences shaped post-war identities and societal roles for women in Japan. Some survivors channeled their experiences into activism, community work, or education, influencing early feminist movements and contributing to the reconstruction of post-war society. Survivor testimonies, archival records, photographs, and historical research have collectively begun to illuminate the lives of Japanese women prisoners of war, revealing the extraordinary resilience, ingenuity, and courage required to survive. These accounts highlight the complex intersection of gender, war, and survival, offering perspectives that challenge simplistic or monolithic portrayals of heroism, victimhood, or national identity. Through diaries, letters, and oral histories, researchers are able to reconstruct daily life, the subtle negotiations with authority, the acts of solidarity between prisoners, and the small, courageous choices that allowed survival in the harshest conditions. Their stories, once obscured, now stand as a testament to the quiet strength, ingenuity, and enduring hope of women who faced unimaginable adversity and survived to bear witness. Through these narratives, the overlooked experiences of female prisoners of war gain the recognition they deserve, highlighting the complex interplay of suffering, resilience, and humanity amidst the upheavals of global conflict. Over time, efforts have emerged to document these hidden histories, slowly bringing to light experiences that had long been obscured by the grand narratives of war. The passage of time, coupled with societal reticence, created a void in historical documentation that modern scholarship has only begun to fill. Yet despite these challenges, the resilience of women in captivity and post-war life endured. The determination to maintain connections with loved ones, to reclaim agency through writing, clandestine communication, and small acts of resistance exemplifies a broader truth about human endurance. Liberation marked an end to physical confinement, but began a new chapter of emotional and social reintegration, one that required courage as profound as that needed to survive the camps themselves. Historical recognition of these experiences lagged significantly. For decades, the stories of women who endured captivity remained largely untold, overshadowed by broader narratives of military history, battles, and national rebuilding. In Japan, the post-war period emphasized reconstruction and the restoration of the nation, often at the expense of acknowledging individual suffering, particularly that of women. Testimonies were delayed, memories suppressed, or considered secondary to the grand narrative of defeat and recovery. Survivors carried these experiences privately, sometimes sharing them only with family or close friends, leaving historians and society at large unaware of the full scope of hardship endured. Returning home was not a return to normalcy, but a confrontation with devastation. Communities were destroyed, families displaced or fractured, and infrastructure in ruins. Women faced the dual challenge of rebuilding homes and families while simultaneously processing experiences that were often dismissed, overlooked, or misunderstood by a society focused on survival and reconstruction. The gap between external relief and internal recovery was profound, leaving many to navigate the aftermath, largely in solitude or in the company of fellow survivors. Every careful stroke of ink, every folded page, became a bridge to a life that existed beyond the immediate horrors of the camp. As the war drew to a close, liberation arrived like a sudden, bewildering shift in reality. Relief and joy were tempered by exhaustion and the recognition that freedom did not erase the traumas endured. Physical recovery was slow and uneven. Bodies weakened by months or years of deprivation required careful nourishment, rest, and attention. Psychological scars remained, invisible but enduring, manifesting in anxiety, nightmares, and difficulty reintegrating into ordinary life. Women became adept at compartmentalizing emotion, balancing fear with resilience. Some attempted to send clandestine messages through underground networks or neutral intermediaries, a testament to both ingenuity and determination. Even in the oppressive atmosphere of captivity, the human need to maintain familial and emotional bonds could not be fully suppressed. These efforts were acts of courage, often fraught with danger, as discovery could lead to punishment or confiscation of the precious words. The act of writing, even if letters never left the camp, was itself a statement of agency and identity, a refusal to surrender entirely to the dehumanizing conditions around them. Each envelope that arrived, each note that survived scrutiny, became a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting women to the world beyond barbed wire. Waiting for messages, hoping against hope for signs of safety, or grappling with silence became an endurance test in itself. Some clung to the belief that family members were alive and well, nurturing hope like a secret flame. Others gradually accepted uncertainty as an unavoidable truth, learning to survive in a liminal space between expectation and despair. The tension between hope and despair shaped the rhythm of daily life, influencing interactions, moods, and small decisions. It was a daily exercise in courage, resourcefulness, and quiet defiance, illustrating the remarkable capacity of individuals to endure, adapt, and preserve their humanity in the harshest circumstances. Letters and communication were painfully limited, a persistent source of anguish for women in captivity. The longing to contact relatives, to hear even a single word from home, became a constant undercurrent of hope and fear. Mail was delayed, censored, or destroyed, leaving prisoners with little assurance that their voices had reached loved ones or that replies had ever been sent. Any news from home arrived sporadically, filtered through camp administrators whose priorities often lay in control and order rather than compassion. The women's ability to read the mood of the camp, anticipate danger, and act with discretion reflected a remarkable combination of observation, memory, and courage. In every aspect of daily survival, from the unpredictable moods of guards to the scarcity of food, women displayed resilience that was extraordinary. They adapted, improvised, and persisted, finding ways to maintain dignity and humanity even when the system sought to remove both. The meticulous documentation of guard behavior, the creation of secret gardens, and the careful sharing of rations all served as lifelines, sustaining both body and spirit. These strategies demonstrate that survival in such conditions was not merely a physical challenge, but a complex psychological and social endeavor. Women quickly adapted to the unspoken rules of interaction with authority, balancing fear with pragmatism. Compliance was often necessary, yet clever observation allowed them to identify moments when subtle resistance could be safely expressed. A glance, a whispered warning, a hidden gesture, all could communicate support, solidarity, or caution. Over time, this careful navigation of social dynamics became second nature, a skill that preserved not only life, but mental stability. Such ingenuity extended to food as well. Secret gardens, foraged roots, or quietly pooled rations represented more than sustenance. They were an assertion of control, a statement that even under deprivation, creativity, intelligence, and moral choice endured. In the middle of deprivation and control, the act of giving preserved self-worth and affirmed social bonds. Stories survive of women quietly slipping portions of rice or root vegetables to neighbors, exchanging morsels with a whispered reassurance, or pooling resources to help the sick or elderly survive another day. Even minor gestures, sharing a scrap of clothing, offering a hand to steady someone who had stumbled, or making a modest herbal remedy from scant materials, became profound tests of character and solidarity. These acts, repeated daily, forged invisible networks of support that could mean the difference between life and death. Even in the most constrained spaces, a patch of soil became a source of both nutrition and psychological solace, a tiny assertion of agency in a world determined to suppress it. These gardens, carefully hidden from guards' eyes, were acts of defiance as much as survival, a reminder that human creativity persists even in the bleakest circumstances. Despite scarcity, communal sharing remained a defining feature of camp life. Women routinely divided meager portions of food with those more vulnerable, placing another's needs before their own hunger. These small acts were not merely practical. They were statements of humanity, fragile yet resolute. Nutrition was another relentless challenge, a constant factor shaping both health and morale. Meals were meager, often reduced to a thin serving of rice or root vegetables, rarely supplemented with protein or essential nutrients. Malnutrition weakened bodies, leaving prisoners vulnerable to infection, illness, and exhaustion. Immune systems, already stressed by harsh conditions, failed to resist disease, making even minor injuries potentially life-threatening. Yet women demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and resilience. When possible, they supplemented their rations through careful foraging, bartering small personal items, or covertly cultivating tiny gardens within the camp. Women quickly learned to read these signals, noting small gestures, shifts in posture, and subtle changes in tone of voice. Survival required a constant negotiation, silence when suspicion lurked, careful compliance when authority threatened, and quiet defiance when discretion allowed. Each day was a strategic exercise, a mental and emotional calculation, designed to minimize risk while preserving the faintest threads of dignity. Many women kept mental or secret written records of guards' names, habits, and behaviors, in attempt to impose order on chaos and retain some sense of control in an environment designed to strip them of autonomy. Interactions with guards varied widely, shaping daily life in ways both subtle and dramatic. Some guards appeared indifferent, following orders with mechanical precision, neither cruel nor compassionate, a neutral presence that allowed prisoners a small margin of predictability. Others displayed hostility or outright abuse, their moods swinging with the pressures of war, fatigue, or personal temperament. The behavior of these men, often young and inexperienced themselves, could change hour by hour, a constant variable in the precarious balance of life behind barbed wire. In every account, the pattern was clear. While camps sought to strip women of agency, their resourcefulness and solidarity turned the harsh environment into a crucible of endurance. In the dark barracks, amid disease, malnutrition, and violence, they cultivated humanity in miniature. Through art, ritual, caregiving, and community, women carved out spaces of safety and dignity, demonstrating that even in the bleakest conditions, resilience can flourish. Their stories remind us that history is not only shaped by battles and treaties, but by the quiet, persistent courage of those who endure, survive, and find ways to retain their humanity when the world around them seems determined to erase it. The persistence of these small acts highlights a dimension of wartime experience, often invisible in historical records. That survival is as much about preserving identity, hope, and social bonds as it is about food or shelter. Beyond the physical and practical ingenuity, the resilience demonstrated in coping with mental trauma was extraordinary. Women developed strategies to maintain hope, clandestine classes in literacy or arithmetic, quiet games to pass the hours, or covertly shared stories of home and childhood. Even small gestures, a folded note, a hidden sketch, a whispered joke, could restore a fragment of dignity. For many, these acts became rituals, repetitions that structured their days and provided a sense of purpose, a psychological lifeline in the midst of chaos. Bandages were fashioned from torn clothing, water was boiled over tiny fires to sterilize instruments, and herbal remedies were employed whenever knowledge or resources allowed. Even in these desperate conditions, ingenuity flourished. Nurses, prisoners themselves, worked tirelessly, often without sleep, attending to dozens of patients with little more than intuition and limited knowledge. Their courage and creativity saved lives daily, sometimes the only thing standing between survival and death. In some camps, these women collaborated with allied medical personnel, exchanging knowledge and labor to maintain basic medical care despite malnutrition, exhaustion, and the constant presence of disease. In these moments, women forged connections that transcended fear, bonds that allowed them to endure what might have been unbearable alone. These communities, fragile yet persistent, became the invisible scaffolding that supported them psychologically and spiritually, even as their bodies withered from hunger and exhaustion. Healthcare within the camps was minimal at best, often non-existent at worst. Medical supplies were scarce, equipment rudimentary, and trained personnel few. In many instances, women relied on each other, improvising treatment for injuries, fevers, and wounds that would have been easily treatable in peacetime. Shared rituals became lifelines, prayers whispered before dawn, storytelling beneath the sparse light of a candle, and the occasional song hummed softly to ward off despair. Each act was a quiet rebellion against the dehumanizing world surrounding them. Music, art, and handmade crafts, often created from scraps of cloth or paper, became tools of emotional survival, offering outlets for creativity, expression, and a reminder of the humanity the camp sought to suppress. Every brushstroke, every note, every carefully folded origami figure was more than pastime. It was a statement. We are still here. We are still human. Isolation amplified these fears, each day stretching like a threadbare rope, threatening to unravel under the weight of helplessness and despair. Yet even amidst these trials, small communities emerged, clusters of women who quietly depended on one another for protection, guidance, and emotional support. Older women assumed maternal roles, offering advice, comfort, and a stabilizing presence to the younger prisoners, nurturing them with the care and wisdom born of experience. The psychological impact of captivity was profound, stretching far beyond the physical hardships of malnutrition, disease, and forced labor. For many women, being confined in a camp stripped away not only freedom, but the very sense of self. Self-esteem eroded under the relentless pressure of surveillance and deprivation, and anxiety became a constant companion. Nightmares returned again and again, filled with the horrors of capture, of violence witnessed or feared, of uncertainty and unfulfilled promises of liberation. Flashbacks haunted quiet moments, when the mind wandered to home, to loved ones, to moments of safety that now felt impossibly distant. A shared piece of bread, a whispered reassurance, a secretly passed note, or a clandestine lesson became acts of defiance and hope. They reminded women that their existence was not wholly consumed by imprisonment. Each day, each breath taken in these conditions was an assertion of life itself, a refusal to be erased by circumstance. The camps were a crucible of suffering, yet within them, the seeds of endurance, creativity, and quiet rebellion flourished. Women who survived these conditions carried the lessons learned in their hearts. The power of solidarity, the importance of small resistances, and the unwavering necessity of maintaining one's identity, even when the world seeks to strip it away. These networks were more than practical. They were acts of resistance. By maintaining connections, women preserved agency over their own lives, however limited, and protected fragments of humanity within a system designed to erase it. Accounts from survivors consistently note that these alliances were crucial. The women who could rely on others, or who could offer support themselves, were often the ones who endured the longest, surviving not only through physical strength, but through the resilience born of empathy, solidarity, and quiet courage. Even amidst the relentless hardships, small gestures carried immense weight. Yet even compliance offered no guarantee of safety. Every day required constant negotiation, a balancing act of effort, observation, and cautious judgment. Women had to discern when to work quickly and when to appear slower, when to speak and when to remain silent. Survival demanded strategy as much as endurance, and every action carried consequence. In the midst of these hardships, women created informal networks of support, bonds born of necessity and trust. They shared food, clothing, and scraps of medical supplies. They warned one another about guards' moods, impending punishments, or outbreaks of illness. They offered comfort during moments of grief and isolation. Work assignments in the camp were harsh and unrelenting. Some women were tasked with cleaning latrines, scrubbing floors, cooking for the soldiers or other prisoners, repairing buildings, or laboring in the fields, planting and harvesting crops that would never feed them. Nurses and medical staff were pressed into service under the supervision of Allied authorities, often working long hours treating injuries, disease, and malnutrition while struggling to maintain their own health. Labor often exceeded 12 hours a day, with few breaks, minimal food, and no protection from the elements. Those who resisted, even slightly, faced punishments ranging from beatings to deprivation of meager rations. These small acts of solidarity became as vital as food or water, providing mental and emotional sustenance when the daily struggle for physical survival left them exhausted and trembling. Even in moments of despair, the women discovered that by sharing, teaching, and preserving fragments of their lives, they could resist the camp's attempt to strip them of identity and dignity. They whispered stories of home late at night, recounted memories of family, festivals, or childhood games, weaving a shared tapestry of culture and humanity. Some found the courage to teach one another skills, passing knowledge as a lifeline: knitting, sewing, simple arithmetic, or basic literacy. Anything that reminded them that the world beyond the camp still existed and that they were more than prisoners. Letters were written with trembling hands, often hidden in straw or folded into clothing, never meant to leave the compound, but rather to serve as a silent testimony that they existed, that they remembered, that they were alive. Disease spread with terrifying speed. Cholera, dysentery, and fevers claimed lives regularly, sometimes silently, sometimes in devastating waves. Malnutrition gnawed at bodies already weakened by fear, labor, and long marches, leaving the women fragile and vulnerable. Blankets were shared, beds were non-existent, and sleep came on hard floors with only the occasional scrap of straw for comfort. Survival, at first, seemed almost a matter of chance. Who would live through the next week? Who would succumb to exhaustion or infection? Yet even in this crushing environment, women sought to preserve a fragile sense of normalcy, a tether to the lives they had been torn from. Their stories, when fully acknowledged, reveal not just survival, but the subtle and complex ways women navigated a world designed to discard them. Inside the camps, conditions were dire beyond imagination, a harsh reality that revealed itself the moment women stepped through the gates. Overcrowding left dozens of prisoners crammed into single barracks, wooden floors hard and splintered beneath them, with little ventilation and walls that did little to keep out the cold or the heat. Sanitation was almost non-existent. Latrines were few and far between, often overflowing, while water supplies were contaminated or rationed so strictly that drinking even a small amount required careful planning. Historical accounts, where they exist, underscore that these women's experiences were not uniform, yet patterns emerge. The combination of exposure to combat zones, forced marches, inadequate nutrition, and the constant threat of sexual and physical violence created conditions that were uniquely devastating. Unlike men, they could not always blend into the uniformed chaos. Their gender often made them targets, witnesses, or symbols. And yet, the very visibility that made them vulnerable also provided a framework for resilience. In noticing one another, protecting each other, and preserving fragments of normalcy, they created microcosms of humanity within the larger machinery of war. They tended small gardens or kept records of events in tiny, hidden notebooks. The human spirit, it seemed, refused to be fully extinguished. It manifested in small acts of defiance, a whispered song at night, a secret drawing, or the careful concealment of personal letters to loved ones. These gestures, though minor in the grand narrative of war, became lifelines, threads that tied them to identity, memory, and hope, offering a fragile sense of control in a world otherwise dominated by fear and coercion. Survivors often recount the psychological toll as harshly as the physical. The isolation, the uncertainty of fate, the terror of an unpredictable authority figure. Even simple acts, drinking water, moving from one shelter to another, became tests of nerves, endurance, and ingenuity. Yet, amidst this terror, these women exhibited remarkable resilience. Some secretly shared what little food they had with others, comforting and protecting younger or weaker prisoners. Others found ways to maintain their skills or knowledge, teaching children smuggled into the camps. With little food, minimal water, and no respite from the insects, disease, or exhaustion that threatened at every step, the constant presence of armed soldiers ensured that fear was never far from their minds. In some cases, the women were forced to labor, building fortifications, hauling supplies, or performing menial tasks under the threat of punishment for the slightest misstep. Others were housed in makeshift camps with straw bedding on hard floors, crowded tents that provided little shelter from storms, and minimal sanitation that spread illness quickly. A nurse who had once administered care in a quiet hospital ward was now fighting to keep herself alive in a crowded transport. A teacher who had led children through lessons found herself navigating the terror of armed guards and shifting alliances. The ordinary rhythms of life were replaced by unpredictability and violence, a daily reminder that survival was no longer guaranteed, and that courage had to be summoned again and again simply to exist. Accounts from survivors describe long marches through dense jungle, often under punishing tropical sun or relentless monsoon rains. Many women found themselves in regions like the Philippines, Indonesia, and Burma, when Japanese forces surrendered or retreated, leaving chaos in their wake. Evacuations turned into ordeals. Overcrowded ships creaked under the weight of refugees, susceptible to storms or enemy attack. Trains jammed with prisoners rattled through hostile terrain, often derailing under the strain of overuse or sabotage. Starvation and disease stalked these journeys as relentlessly as enemy fire. In these moments, the ordinary boundaries between civilian and soldier blurred entirely. Unlike male soldiers, whose experiences dominate the historical record, these women's suffering has too often been muted or forgotten. Yet their stories are no less real, no less poignant, no less important to understanding the full scope of the conflict. Their peril was compounded by the fact that gender often made them invisible, yet vulnerable in ways uniquely harrowing. The constant threat of sexual violence, coercion, or being overlooked entirely for aid or protection, leaving them at the mercy of circumstances beyond their control. The journey to captivity itself was a crucible. Japan, 1941. The Pacific War had begun, and the shadow of conflict stretched across the islands and beyond, touching every port, every village, every home. Among the first to face its horrors were women, often overlooked in the pages of history, yet caught squarely in the crossfire of military ambition and colonial occupation. From nurses tending to the wounded, to factory workers producing the engines of war, young and old alike were suddenly thrust into circumstances that demanded resilience beyond their years. Capture by Allied forces, particularly in Southeast Asia, meant not only the abrupt separation from family and home, but also a sudden, profound loss of autonomy, safety, and dignity.